All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome yet again to this Becoming Superconductors of Love Summit. And today I am so happy to be with Melanie Reinhart, who many of you probably already are familiar with. But Melanie is one of my favorite beings on the planet and a beautiful astrologer, beautiful human, and a very dear, important friend. So thank you, Melanie, so much for being here.
Thank you, Martha, for this lovely invitation.
Mm,
I always enjoy our conversations.
yeah. Absolutely. So, yes, so today is day 3 of this, well, day 4-ish. This is the third talk in this summit, um we are this talk is coming out on the day that is 2 days before the lunar eclipse. And the day when this is coming out, actually, Venus happens to be conjunct Mercury, which is interesting because I think that's going to probably play into our conversation. But yeah, so there's many powerful, beautiful things happening on the day this happens to be coming out. And anytime you happen to be hearing this video, I'm sure there is medicine here for you. But Melanie, as we're dropping into this day of the summit of becoming superconductors of love and this whole kind of portal time that we're in on the planet and all of it, what is alive for you? What's here?
So, as we were talking about already before we started recording, references to the Venus cycle are very much alive for me. In a simple way, it's often said that Venus is the goddess of love, and in the horoscope, Venus does represent variations on a theme of that. But if you really explore, and by explore, I mean experientially explore, not just read about, although reading about the Venus cycle can be quite mind blowing because it has the most extraordinary geometry written into the cycle. But the story, which I'm very interested in, which reflects the Venus cycle overall, is the story of the goddess Inanna, an ancient Mesopotamian goddess. And in that culture back then, planet that we call Venus was considered to be a personification of the goddess Inanna. So there's a very deep and ancient connection with this cycle. And the story of Inanna um, one can almost see the movements of Venus, the rising and setting, and going from a high declination in the sky right down to setting and disappearing twice within the overall cycle, which is roughly 18 months long. You can almost read it as an almanac um, of the movement of Venus, because the phases of the story of Inanna, they tie up in such a graphic way to the movement of Venus. And if any of you have your curiosity piqued by what I've just said, you can check out on my website. If you go to the articles section, and there's 2 subsections. One is me, the other one is guest writers. So if you go onto my page and then scroll way down, it's a huge page with a lot of stuff on it, but there's a whole section on Venus. And there you'll find a kind of just a short page with all of the, that, like an ephemeris of what she's up to, rising, setting, appearing, disappearing, and so on. That's current. And you will also find an exploration of the story of Inanna in the light of the astronomical movement and so forth. And that's written up quite long. It's about 5,000 words, but that will give you enough material to really connect in with this cycle. And I find it also useful to describe Venus, yes, as the goddess of love, also value, because, we can't love something we don't value. And it's a very subtle kind of quality that's very foundational in the heart and gives rise to all kinds of qualities like appreciation or honoring or even gratitude, So very subtle. But I also think it's useful that Venus in the horoscope, there I mean by house and sign and aspects and so forth, can also be thought of as, yes, love, what we love, how we love, even who we love, but also what happens when we lose what we love, be it a literal loss, like a much beloved friend or partner dies, or a relationship ends, or let's say we have a really precious brooch. This just happened to me right in sync with the cycle. I thought that I had lost a favorite brooch, which has zero value in money terms, but huge value for me personally, because it was given to me many years ago by this marvelous elderly woman who was a mentor of mine. And she gave this to me, and I wore it a lot. And then suddenly I couldn't find it. But it did turn up, actually. But when I couldn't find it, I thought, oh, it's the Inanna story again. So, yes, Venus as a reflection of how we react to loss. I mean, loss is a very universal kind of experience. But people's style of experiencing grief can be very different from one person to another. There are also different stages of acknowledging loss and experiencing grief. So, mourning is not a uniform condition which lasts for a certain amount of time and then gets switched off, right? It has its own phases and seasons, and those are all portrayed in one way or another in the story of Inanna. So I wanted to just flag that up, because where we are in the Venus cycle at the moment is that Venus turned retrograde on March the 2nd, and that was at 10:50 of Aries. The next event is that Venus has been and still is gradually lowering and lowering where she's visible in the sky. So it's like she's coming down to Earth, the place of mortality.
So she's
And
been
in the story of Inanna, she makes a descent into the underworld in order to go and meet with her sister called Ereshkigal, who's down in the underworld mourning the loss of her much beloved husband called Gugulana, which means the bull of heaven.
Mm.
So down she goes, and we see Venus in the process of that descent, literally now, at the moment. And if you do actually watch the skies, you will be able to literally see this. Every night, Venus is a little bit lower in the sky, getting closer and closer to the horizon,
Mhm.
whereupon she disappears. So
And at the
that
time,
set happens on March the 19th. So it's right on the spring equinox day as well.
wow.
Venus sets,
And
which
on
is just extraordinary. Sorry, I keep
no, it's okay.
interrupting you. Please
But
carry on.
just to point out for people, so yeah, so she's been very, very bright in the evening sky on the western horizon, super, super, super bright. And now you're saying she's descending, she's getting lower on in the evening sky. And at the time of this video coming out, actually she'll be in the sky with Mercury, which is interesting, right? And right before she's continuing retrograde. Mercury is still going direct, although Mercury is about to go retrograde too. Um, and then she'll disappear. Anyway, yes, I just want to describe that a little
Yeah,
more.
lovely, lovely. Thank you. And following that, there is the interior conjunction. That's March the 23rd. And wanted to mention these dates because the day of her heliacal rise, that's when she rises as the morning star. So when she does that, she's still just in the beginning of Aries, 022.
Mm.
And within that 24-hour period of the heliacal rising, she also changes signs and retrogrades back into Pisces again. So, in other words, the Venus cycle is giving us a little microcosm of the bigger planetary patterns that we all know about by this time, which is both Saturn and Neptune about to go into Aries, but they will make a revisit back to Pisces later in the year, in the autumn northern hemisphere. But the exchange between those two signs, the symbolism of that is just written all over the place at the
And Mercury.
moment. And this is one of the places
Mhm.
that puts that whole transition under the microscope. And so that's a snapshot of these times
Mm.
within which we're talking.
Mm.
So, to continue with the theme of what is love, I mean, that has to be that has to be the most impossible question one could possibly ask.
The biggest question on the planet and
Yeah,
the
exactly. And sort of almost the more one tries to say about it, the less likely it is that the words are going to be able to evoke what it's
Mhm.
really all about. But we'll have a go. And what I do want to start with is just a reminder about some of our very basic astrological symbols. And I'm going to go fairly slow paced through this with the idea of allowing a kind of contemplative space for you and for me to just connect in with the very basic shapes and forms and geometry. So, starting with the circle, in sacred geometry, the circle stands for wholeness, that which is complete and without beginning or end. It's only one line. It also brings in a certain quality of discernment. So once you have a circle, you have an inside and an outside on either side of the line. And so from that point of view, the line represents the in-betweenness, that which is between what is inside and what is outside, and which in that sense actually binds them together, that contributing to the feeling of wholeness. And so if we think of love, there is a sense in which the feeling of love can evoke within us a precious sense of completeness, that we feel perhaps completed by the person we love, the friend or lover or parent, be any kind of relationship, you know. And yet on some level we know that it's not really them. It's what the two people together generate as like a field of love, which evokes in turn the feeling of wholeness or completeness. So following on with what I said about Venus and loss, so the loss of our sense of wholeness can feel absolutely devastating. And one hears, you know, in the romantic literature, it's full of stories of people who never did recover from a central core loss of their beloved in their lives. Looked at slightly differently, there's also a great body of mystical literature which refers to the divine or the Most High. So I'm already like losing my words here, or God, but who refers to that precious source as the beloved. And those of you who are familiar with the poetry of Rumi, you'll be familiar with that analogy because it's used over and over again. And so the human beloved can also be seen as a representative of the beloved with the capital B, so to speak. And mystical poetry from many different traditions, it is love poetry. It's our love of the divine, of the god or the goddess, whatever words we want to put on that. But it's the feeling of living and moving and having our very being in that field, in that sacred field. And so, from that point of view, love is way more than just a feeling, although at the feeling level, it's no small thing. But it's as if it opens us into the whole field of love. In fact, that very metaphor, there is a poem of Rumi, a very famous one. He speaks about there is a field of love out there, and I'll meet you there. That's just a paraphrase from memory, but you would easily find it if you went looking. So it is something very profound that happens between two people. So there's a very strong element of connection, which brings me back to the symbol of the circle and the perfection of that. So, as I'm sure anyone watching will know, the astrological symbol for the sun is a circle with a dot in the middle. That meaning to refer to the point of individual light that we are, each of us, which in turn reflects the greater light or the wholeness of the light. And the sun, of course, refers to very important things about our own individuality and its development and also its consecration. So it's referring to selfhood at various different levels, all the way from our ego structures on up to the opening that occurs when that point of light within ourselves is truly felt and honored. So the circle and the dot is the sun, which of course is the ruling planet of the sign of Leo, which in turn is associated physically with the heart. So we've got a very nice little loop there. I want to take the symbol further. So in astrology, if we take a heliocentric view, in other words, with the sun in the middle, so we know that that is actually how the solar system goes. That all the planets, including us on Earth, they all go around the sun. Okay. The view that we use when we cast an astrological chart is usually the geocentric perception. In other words, from the point of view of us here on Earth and what we see in the sky. But there is also a heliocentric way of drawing up a chart. And if we do it that way, well, obviously we don't have the sun on the chart because we're kind of, as it were, standing on it, looking at all the things going around us. Okay. But in the work of Alice Bailey, in fact, she does a little mix and match with these and puts into the chart the position of the Earth as it would be in a heliocentric chart, even though the usual one that we are familiar with is the tropical chart. So how it works out is the Earth, if you want to place it on your chart, is always exactly to the minute opposite where your sun is found. Mm-hmm. By exact zodiac measurement, and then, of course, exact in terms of the houses. And that also means that if you happen to have your sun in your horoscope opposite any planet, well, that planet is going to be conjunct the Earth in your chart. And this is a very interesting thing that crops up. Putting the Earth in adds a whole other dimension of this, saying something about, okay, this is where your process of incarnation will surely take you. Mm. There's no should involved there. It's just that you will see that. Mm. And so the symbol in astrology for the Earth is a circle with an upright cross in the middle of it. And it's a cross which reaches to the edge of the circle in 4 directions. And to me, that is so profound. Because firstly, dividing the circle by 4, many references we could make with that. The 4 seasons, the equinoxes and solstices, the 4 in-between festivals that go through the year, the 4 elements. I mean, we could go on and on with that. But what's also interesting is to realize that the cross also has the implication of the dot in the middle. Remember, I said, okay, the circle is wholeness, perfection, a unifying reference. And when we put the dot in the middle, we got the symbol for the sun. And it's almost like, I'm thinking in a strange way here, almost like if that dot was a lump of chewing gum, right? You'd be able to take the chewing gum and go zit and pull it out so that it connects horizontally with the edges of the circle. And you can also go whoop, the other way and have it connect top and bottom. So vertically. And it occurred to me that that's a very interesting way of looking at relationship itself, but also different phases of relationship. Because if a relationship lasts a very long time, whether it's a marriage or a friendship, or even a relationship with members of your family, they can be with you a really long time, and they may well go through phases of relationship over time. And so this very simple, it's not exactly a map, but a reference to the horizontal and the vertical, to me is very interesting, and it can also be quite useful. So along the horizontal is where we find the endeavor of trying to move towards equality and equal exchange. And on the vertical axis, could say that we find unequal relationships. But here, unequal doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just the energetic position in which the two people find themselves, which may have a profound sense of appropriateness, like parent-child, or mentor and student, or teacher and student, or doctor and patient, and so forth. Now, if there's no sense of horizontal connection, but one gets stuck in the vertical, that can bring out regressive tendencies of our own biography, where we would maybe in some murky corner, we'd like to go back to being a child and have somebody else take the responsibility, or somebody else take the rap when we mess up, and that kind of thing. But that's an extreme. I think that, in these very Uranian times that we're living in, there is something about the vertical relationship that people find very difficult to just accept in a positive way. Uranus style, they want to just overturn it. They want to be the boss, or they want to, that kind of thing. And yet that can be a recipe for not really learning anything. Because we learn from people who are wiser than us, or who know more than us, or who have skills that we're just learning, you know. And that also applies in a relationship. And not only to something fairly concrete like a set of skills or something like that, but if you're in a deep relationship with somebody and there is enough of the horizontal endeavor, you will find yourself learning all kinds of things from the other person, imbibing at an energy level, learning by example, for, for instance. And all of these transactions can be going on within the field of love. Okay. And in that vertical axis, so I mentioned that that can be where we catch ourselves in regressive mood and not wanting to take responsibility for ourselves and so forth. Now, psychologically, is a very interesting dimension of the vertical axis. In fact, I'm going to change what I just said. Actually, this can crop up on either of the two axes, but it's a way of understanding the past of our formative relationships. So that will be primarily with mother, also with father, any other caretakers who were involved in our upbringing. It can also involve other members of the family, especially siblings. Remember, Inanna went on her underworld journey, in order to meet with her sister, Ereshkigal. So in that amazing story, the whole sibling relationship is implicated. And that can be literally with our actual biological siblings. And it can also be with an other who resides within us. Sometimes that can be referred to as the shadow. That's a kind of tricky word because it's become a kind of catch-all. But certainly the internal other can be a representative of potentials that we've yet to develop, or a side of our nature that for developmental reasons or whatever we're not very comfortable with. That can end up in the shadows and so forth. But back to the psychological process. One of the so-called post-Freudians was an extraordinary woman called Melanie Klein. And she is credited with giving voice to what became a very important concept to do with our very early development. And it became called object relations. I've always found that a slightly strange phrase, but when you think about what it's actually referring to, it makes sense. So as we develop, we do begin in a very merged state with our mother. And that's true, whatever the quality of mothering we're receiving from her. Okay. Now, there comes a point in our development where we begin to recognize other people as different and mother as different. So a kind of a space opens up, and then there are others additional to us. I'm putting this almost like a cartoon version, but I think it's important enough to just mention. And so it's those primary relationship with the others in our life that constitute these key relationships with, that's what object relations refers to. And what is so interesting and so useful about this whole notion is that those very early patterns, not only with our mother, and also not only centered in the precognitive years, those are very powerful for sure, but an object relation can actually be laid down at any point in our life. And it becomes a whole structure which characterized the way that we related to somebody. And the thing is that sometimes those structures survive into adulthood. And because in a way there's something in us which is looking to grow beyond those structures, well, damn me if they don't repeat. And they're not doing that to kind of get at us or because that's a bad thing to be happening. It's not that. It's just that the impulse for healing and for growing in a broader way is so powerful that this is what gets kicked up. And it's extremely useful if one is exploring what has become difficult in a relationship. And, you know, this can vary from something which is very subtle, but it just is in your heart. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. Yeah, it can vary from that, very subtle and almost invisible, to, you know, a full-blown major conflict with somebody. But the moment that you feel your own energy has kind of been triggered, you can ask yourself questions like, well, who am I really relating to here?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't have to be a question with a pat answer. It's not something you have to figure out, okay? But that's a kind of exploratory question which honors the curiosity within the soul who wants to understand things and so forth. And lo and behold, you might discover that you're caught in a structure of object relation, which means that perhaps it's your relationship with your sister that became super intense because the bonding that you felt with your own mother wasn't very strong. And so there was a strong sense of abandonment and insecurity and so forth, which then latched onto the sibling. This is a made up example, but some of you may relate to it anyway. And so then that relationship with the sibling will get repeated in one way or another. And that's part of the mystery and the glory of what happens. So the closer we get to somebody and or the longer we know them, the more likely it is that these ancient object relations are going to be drawn up to the surface. And if we kind of know a little about how that kind of process works, it is liberating beyond measure to discover. In a way, it's one's own delusions or illusions about oneself and the other person and so forth, and where that comes from. Because the thing about the psyche is that there is a very strong nose for the truth within the soul. And taking this object relations business as an example, if you're having a real struggle in a relationship and you correctly identify the source of where the pattern that you feel bedeviled by actually comes from, the soul will let you know that you've rung the bell of truth.
Mm.
And it's not, you don't have to like prove anything, when you don't need anybody to tell you, you know, when you've really kind of stumbled upon something that is really true and you've seen it and you know because of the amount of energy that gets released. It's like some part of you that perhaps was imprisoned in the kind of ancient structures that underpin a particular relationship. And if you see it as it is, and with compassion, it's like king, the energy returns to you. So in a very real way, that's a process of like soul retrieval
Mm.
that any of us, all of us, can do subtly, sometimes incredibly quickly. Sometimes it can take weeks or months or even years to get to the bottom of what's going on. But sometimes it can literally be a few seconds when you, oh, wow, I see what I'm doing. I see where I am. It's like right now, I'm only 2 years old and I'm longing. I want my sibling to pay attention to me because my mother isn't doing that. And the powerful feelings that can go with that. So you see, to me, the underworld journey that is associated with Venus is that's the territory in which some of all these deep patterns are revealed to us. And then, like in the story of Inanna, which if you read it on my website, you'll see this. When Inanna is finally down in the underworld, her sister Ereshkigal turns her eye of death on Inanna, and Inanna dies and she's hung up on a peg. So Inanna was smart enough to leave instructions with her maidservant called Geshtinanna, basically saying, if I'm not back in 3 days, send help. And so she doesn't come back in 3 days, Inanna. And so Geshtinanna eventually finds the help by going to Enki, the god of the waters. Waters, it's like this cycle is going back into Pisces to get to those waters, okay? And so these little creatures called the kukura, which were made from the dirt under the fingernails of Enki.
Mm.
They're the smallest, humblest, most sort of yucky little things. They're small enough to get down into the underworld by sort of slipping through the cracks. So they won't be attacked or turned back or anything. They slip in. And Ereshkigal's down there in a state of advanced mourning. And it's kind of out loud, and she's bemoaning and wailing. And for example, she says, oh, my insides. And then these little creatures just echo her back. They say, oh, your insides. And she says, oh, my outsides. And they say, oh, your outsides. So they echo her, in the manner of there's a whole there's many techniques, therapeutic techniques, which revolve around that capacity to just echo. It's not like you go in there trying to transform something or change something or do smart maneuvers with something. You simply echo what's there. And eventually, Ereshkigal's heart is melted by these little creatures. And she wants to know if there's something that she can do to return their kindness. And of course, they immediately jump and say, yeah, we want the body of Inanna back. And so that happens. And Inanna eventually makes her way up out of the underworld. Um, there's lots of phases to the story. It's almost like the core bit, which occurs around the interior conjunction. That's March the 23rd. So that's when we really are held in the deep.
Mm.
When we really do have an opportunity to join up a few dots. There's another feature of the Inanna story, which I won't go too much into now, is that there's references to the way that that incomplete mourning and grief can be enacted as violence or destructiveness, and how the story overall includes a real recognition of that fact in the beginning of understanding and repentance and so forth, which I find so beautiful and powerful about the story. But anyway, this object relations thing can really help us, especially, in a relationship where, to all intent and purposes, there could be and even should be a healthy exchange of equals. And if that snags up on an ancient vertical pattern, likely to be a mother-child or father-child pattern, third, it can put the wrecking ball in the direction of the horizontal relationship. And yet, if we can see what's happening, it can be a complete revelation. Very, very freeing. So the other thing about the symbol of the earth with this cross touching the circle in 4 places, because, as I said, in the center of that cross is the dot in the middle. So it's like that whole symbol actually contains the symbol of the sun within it. And if, I was playing with the image of the chewing gum. That's right.
Mhm.
But wanting to stretch that, forgive the pun with the chewing gum, etc., from that central space, which connects with the heart via the symbol of the sun, which rules Leo, which rules the heart physically. And chakra-wise, Venus is associated with the heart. But relationship, as it were, in all 4 directions of consciousness here, can be engaged with from that center. So along the horizontal horizontal line, we can engage with all kinds of different people along that line and feel some sense of equality at some level or another with them. Doesn't have to just be in a role, it's how we feel inside. And then along the vertical axis, we can, as it were, clean up the remnants of vertical axis material within ourselves, which for sure, any of you who've ever had a therapist, a mentor, a teacher who you have valued, Venus, a lot, you will know that if you hang in there long enough and deeply enough, you will be confronted with the residue of your own vertical relationships that date all the way back to early childhood. And from that center point, it's like we can traverse all these different dimensions of relationships, down into the underworld to discover our own residue. We can travel into the upper worlds to see the spiritual purpose of what brought us together with somebody. And then at the horizontal level, a similar thing, And so there is enormous flexibility if we are kind of standing in the middle of that pattern. And the other thing is these dimensions don't only refer to the psychological level, but they can also be trans-dimensional, meaning that now I'm sure that there are some of you out there watching where you've had the experience of losing a loved one to death, physical death, and that they have, after their physical death, they have appeared to you perhaps through a dream, perhaps through a waking experience, which is not simply that you think about them fondly and miss them and all that. It's like wham, their presence, as it were, visits you. And I'm not necessarily talking here about seeing ghosts and that kind of thing, although that could be part of it, you know. But it's more the vibrational internal connection with the eternal dimension of that relationship. And that's very real for many people. It's not necessarily something which is freely and easily spoken about. That's because of the kind of worldview and cosmology which we, you know, culturally we've all been brainwashed in such a way that the prevailing view doesn't really include that, except to pathologize it in one way or another. But it's very common and very normal and even healthy and useful, I believe, to have a sense of contact with those who you've lost to death. And so the dimensionality doesn't only go side to side and up and down, but we'd have to think of the symbol as a 3D, which goes like through the middle and forwards and backwards as well. So our relations also have that. And I'm sure that many of you too have had the experience of meeting somebody and you just know that you've known them for a lot longer than this life. Some people even have the gift of being able to know the details of what that looks like. But on one level, that doesn't necessarily matter as much as this sense of continuity and the web of continuity that we all live embedded in that, whether we're very conscious of that or completely oblivious of that. The fact is, that's the kind of world that we inhabit. And Venus, at one level, serves to remind us of that.
Can I bring in one more layer?
Yes, please do.
So you and I have talked about this before, and Chris Skidmore and I have talked about this. Maybe the three of us have talked about this too. But I keep thinking of also the Venus Urania element.
Ah, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking of the vertical and the horizontal and the center and the multi-dimensionality and all of it. And then for me, there's this other part of the reality of a sense of also a container, like a divine love container hold
Yes.
the whole thing. And this other version of love, ultimate divine love, that to me feels like, and it's something I'm only familiar with personally in the last, very consciously in the last year and a half, but is the sense of this other kind of meta love that is holding the whole thing.
Yeah.
I really resonate with what you're saying about being in the center, and then also coming into contact with this meta love that's more of this
Mm.
Uranian version of Venusian reality or something. Yeah, that makes it all okay. Like, in other words, the sense for me of when I have now found this kind of Uranian love and I can tap into that personally, then when I'm traversing the human horizontal love, and even coming into healing my own remnants of the vertical love, karmic patternings or whatever it is, it's that divine love holding space that that's containing it all, and that makes it all okay, right? That I can I can feel safe because I feel held by this ultimate version of love.
Yeah,
A total game.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what that makes me think of immediately is in the work of Alice Bailey, in her book called Esoteric Astrology,
Mm,
one of the features that you'll find in there is that she has a whole additional set of rulerships
yes.
of the signs by the planets.
Yes.
And lo and behold, um, the esoteric ruler of Venus's sign of Libra is Uranus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's an amazing connection because, in terms of the mythology, there is one version of the origins of Venus, which says that after Kronos castrated his father Uranus,
Mhm,
his bleeding genitals were thrown into the sea,
mhm,
and from the foam which arose,
mhm.
Aphrodite emerged from the sea. So Aphrodite, the foam born,
Yeah.
is a well-known classical image. But I can remember almost jumping out of my seat when I was reading esoteric astrology and I saw Uranus being the esoteric ruler of the sign of Libra.
Mm,
And that's so profound because, you know, in these Uranian times that we're living in, and I say that simply because Uranus is one of the rulers of Aquarius, where Pluto is at the moment and will be until 2044. So that brings this Libran field, this Venusian field, into center stage in terms of the big changes that we are all going through in one way or another. And there is this whole Venusian context or undertow, which is at work very strongly at the moment. And I think, there are many, many pressures on relationships at the moment. There's almost a speeding up of awareness of what is going on here. And you can even look at that in terms of relationship between nations,
mm,
although that can be a bit of a slippery slope. In my opinion, if you want to do that, then at least do that from your own center if you possibly can, and track where and how you are getting triggered and
mhm,
what you may be overlaying onto the collective stroke historical situation.
mm.
It may come from your own internal object relations.
Yeah.
And, that's not just a useless exercise of navel gazing. It's a powerful way to engage with the clearing of your own consciousness.
Mm, mm.
I think that Pluto in Aquarius is a big challenge to all of us in terms of um, becoming more and more aware of what we're doing with our own minds
Yeah.
and therefore what we communicate and so forth. Uh, because Aquarius is the third of three air signs,
Mhm.
which have communication as a really important feature of them, communication and how we work with the mind. And so relationships can be a mirror of exactly that. It could even be the postman
Mm, mm.
or the bus conductor or some apparently insignificant random connection with a stranger just in the general bump and grind of life. But if you if you have the blessing of feeling really centered on a given day, even that tiny few seconds of an exchange with somebody can serve to mirror to you what you may be overlaying on that person who you don't know. You may never see them again, and nothing too dramatic happened. But if you're alert, you can see worlds unfolding in that exchange that can educate you about what's going on in those places of residue, and that you will feel the surge in your energy. It's like once you make a correct guess or a correct deduction, you feel it immediately.
Can I bring in another?
Yeah, please.
I would love to tie this to this eclipse coming up because I'm curious to get your perspective. Um, Here, I'm just going to bring up the chart of the eclipse. So this eclipse is happening, March 14th for most parts of the world, March 13th for me,
Mm-hmm.
technically midnight in the west coast of the Americas. But anyway, so I'm just thinking, I'm just feeling into this. So I'm thinking, okay, so Venus went retrograde on March 2nd for you, March 2nd
Yeah,
for March 1st for me, March 2nd for you, at
yeah.
10 degrees 50 minutes of Aries over here. And by the time of this eclipse, so on the day that this video is coming out, Venus is conjunct Mercury. By the time
Mm-hmm.
2 days later, she's now past Mercury, and it's the time of this eclipse. And now here she is, just having gone retrograde past Mercury. And to the day after the eclipse, Mercury is going retrograde at 9 degrees of Aries. So almost right where Venus was, right? And then we're going to have our solar eclipse 2 weeks later at the point where Mercury is going to go retrograde at 9 degrees of Aries.
Yeah.
Very interesting point right here. But so I'm just feeling into this. This is a lunar eclipse. So we're going to have the shadow. The moon is going to go into the shadow of the earth at the time of the
Mm-hmm.
total lunar eclipse. Plus we have Venus heading down toward her under she's heading into her underworld journey at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
back toward the sun. She's going to be conjunct the sun on, you said March 23rd, I think, right?
That's right.
10 days after this eclipse. So in between the two eclipses, Venus will be conjunct the sun. So anyway, I'm just if you feel into this whole story happening right now as we're leading up to the eclipse and we get to the time of this lunar eclipse, how
Yeah.
how does this Venus journey play in for you? Oh, and I'll just throw in Uranus, which we've been talking about. Uranus is almost to I mean, within what, 7 minutes trining the moon precisely. So, I mean, it's 1 degree off, but it's within a few minutes, right? So Uranus is a big player energetically, I feel like, for this lunar eclipse too. Anyway, what's your,
Yeah.
yeah, what's your feeling here?
So a couple of thoughts come to mind. Um, One I mentioned already, but I'll say it again. So um, after that interior conjunction on the 23rd, it's 3 days later that Venus will reappear
Yes.
as the morning star. And within that same 24 hours, Venus will retrograde back into Pisces.
Yes.
Okay. So, and then eventually she will go direct on the 13th of April. Okay.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, if we think about the eclipse, so firstly, the lunar eclipse, if we put the sun uh, into, uh, if we consider, first, if we consider the lunar eclipse, well, the sun is opposite the moon. So, yes, the moon comes under the shadow of the earth,
Mm.
but the symbol for the earth, if we would put that into the chart, would
Mm.
be conjunct the moon.
Yes, I was thinking about that too. Yes.
Yeah. And so that kind of adds to the symbolism of it being uh, a lunar eclipse. So at the full moon,
Mhm.
and it's the moon in Virgo, which is an earth sign,
Mhm.
and um, putting the earth into that chart, the earth would show up in the same degree, you see.
I'll just
So
throw this.
it's a tremendous emphasis onto that sign
Yeah.
of Virgo. That's
Interesting.
how that's
Mm.
how I would see that. And then of course with the solar eclipse, the position of the earth on that chart will also be opposite. And so it will be, the earth will be in Libra, which
Mm.
kind of chimes with what we've been talking about, because the esoteric ruler of Libra is Uranus.
Wow. Yes. Here's the here's the solar eclipse, 9 degrees, the new moon at 9 degrees of Aries, and Mercury having gone, I mean, it's at that point retrograde, about
Yeah.
to re-enter Pisces the next, no, sorry, it just, oh my goodness. Yes, it's going to re-enter Pisces conjunct Neptune, as Neptune is
Yes.
2959 Pisces, and
Yes.
will enter Aries the day after the solar eclipse, after having met. So Mercury is this really interesting player in this whole whole time.
Yes. You know, it's so interesting that both Mercury and Venus are doing that threshold crossing between Aries and Pisces,
Yeah.
because, you know, that's the theme that's in major focus with Saturn and Neptune. In other words, the slower moving planets. But because we're having Venus and Mercury, two faster moving planets, two inner planets, because we're having them echo that very same transition. That means that, you know, the themes that we've been talking about are perhaps very much accessible to all
Mm.
of us in so many ways. And in that way, kind of going alongside these much bigger, more epoch making, history making, etc., transits which are also going on. It's like we have our own microcosm of that within easy reach with these two transits of Venus and Mercury.
Right. And just to also, I'm just thinking, okay, so Mercury, of course, is going to be conjunct Neptune at 2959, just as Neptune is about to make that big shift into Aries the next day after the solar eclipse. And Mercury
Yeah.
and Neptune are the rulers of the nodes right now. Mercury,
Yes.
yeah, Virgo, and then Neptune ruling Pisces, of course, right? And then when Venus does eventually go direct, it will be pretty much conjunct Saturn, I'm pretty sure, if I remember that right. Um, anyway, so yeah, so it's like these two inner, the only two planets in our solar system that are between the Earth and the Sun, Mercury and Venus, are both touching in with these two more outer planets, the Neptune and the Saturn,
Mhm.
which are making their
Yeah.
way to eventually be conjunct at 0 degrees of Aries next year, right? But they're both doing that, like you're saying, that dance. Yeah, anyway, it's all, I'm speaking out loud as it's as it's working itself out in me. But wow.
Yeah, you're doing the Mercury bit for us. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow, wow. Mm. So if you kind of feel into that whole picture, what would you, and we can't know, of course, really, but the feeling I get in my body just listening to you right now is we perhaps have this inner journey going on at the same time that we have this outer journey going on, this collective, more transpersonal journey, and even a transcendent journey going on. So we have the both and we have like the parallel
Mm.
process,
Yeah,
inner, outer, right? Which is always true, but it's just extra, extra, extra true here, perhaps. Um,
yeah.
how does that feel for you? What do you feel like are the real ultimate themes, at least in your own being? And of course, it's going to be different for everybody, but
Yeah, for me, there's something about um, the movement from mutable water to cardinal fire.
oh,
And I'm naming it just because um, even if we only know a little bit about the elements and the modes, to me, they really evoke something. So the mutable water, that being Pisces, that is a place of dissolving and of letting go. And then the cardinal fire is a signature of initiation, both in the sense of beginning something, starting something, but also having revealed to you a different level of consciousness. So in that case, that's not so much about an action. Taking an initiative can be an action. And so there's something about the reciprocality between these two very opposite states of mind and being that perhaps we can kind of shepherd, um, because potentially either one of those two have their own capacity for destruction,
mm,
and either one of them have their own capacity for something quite sublime. Likewise, also together, we could see that a whole lot of water puts out a whole lot of fire. Okay. We could also see that fire can warm up cold water and melt ice and so forth. But in my way of thinking, if I think of it as a lemniscate or
mm,
a figure of eight, where the energies are kind of moving between these two. And so it's not that one energy is better than the other one, or
yes,
that we're moving from one to the other in that
yes,
linear way, which, we're also brainwashed that that's one of the ways we automatically think
yes,
something goes from one thing to the other.
yes.
And usually the thing we're going from gets labeled as bad, and the thing we think we're going to, it's labeled as good. I mean, it's also weird, really. But
Mhm,
if you think of it as a lemniscate, which is a kind of 3D figure of eight,
mm, 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 mm.
to me, that's more realistic because if you keep careful track of your own process, you'll see that is how the energy is moving at the moment. And so to me, the better part of wisdom is to try and accommodate both
Yes.
as far as you can, because the energy will take you in a lemniscate between the two. You don't have to integrate anything or fix anything
Mm,
or such things. but there is a flow of energy between these two quite polarized set of energies. There is an energy that is moving between them, and you will feel it, I think, if you give yourself time to do so.
Wow, that is so key. So important what you just said.
Well, you
Yeah.
know, also because things are so incredibly intense at the moment
Yeah.
on our poor beleaguered planet. And, you know, we all want to know what we can do to make it better.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of us may be shown some very specific things that we're being called to do, to take action.
Mhm.
And you hear these amazing stories of people during whatever war who get inspired. I mean, like the women who drove the ambulances on the front line in World War One, for example.
Yeah.
Many of them did so on the back of a calling. They weren't called up. They called themselves up, or God called them up, or whatever, you know. But that's not everybody's way. Now there's a line of a poem which I'm half remembering. Hmm. I don't think I'm going to be able to fetch it back. But the line in the poem is a reminder of the value of standing in silence or being in silence. So that is also a work. I mean, to be able to hold or be held by that lemniscate movement can go some way to preventing us from misusing inadvertently our own passion and our own energy. And it could be said to contribute to the field of peace and
Mhm.
love.
Mhm.
And that is something very real, you know. Okay, part of us that's kind of been brainwashed into materialistic thinking and so on, which one way or another we've all been exposed to. But if we can part the curtains on that, you know, there are other levels at which all of the troubles of the earth at the moment are occurring,
Mhm.
and our own state of mind and heart makes a contribution there as well.
Definitely.
So that's kind of how I would think of it, because not all of us have the kind of temperament that we're going to receive guidance that we've got to go drive an ambulance on the front line or the equivalent. Not all of us have that kind of temperament, which would be of any use in a situation like that. But never should we ever think that who we are and how we experience our own life is without value. Value equals Venus, remember?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
a really important Venus theme of love, is to never discount what you can do, even if it's invisible to others,
Yeah.
even if were you to explain it to others, you might be laughed at.
Mhm.
So even without all that, that your own experience and your own thoughts and feelings have value
Yes.
as a part of the whole context in which all of us are living. And so, how we contribute to that field of experience that is us at the moment, that really matters. And that's within the reach of all of us, microcosm, macrocosm, etc. You know, that's how I see it.
Yes, so I'm putting all these things together. I can just sort of sum it up and personalize it a little bit, maybe, and encapsulate it the way it's
Mm.
coming across to me, at least. So I'm thinking of myself with very strong Aries and very strong Pisces energy, right? Venus South Node Chiron conjunct in Aries, and then my Sun and my Mercury in Pisces. So I've got both very, very strong. And I'm thinking back to my 20s when I was maybe more in my, well, I was always both energies, but that more of the activist and the, wanting to go out there and protest and, I don't know, shave my head because I had gone to
Yeah.
Pakistan and I was angry at the way that women are treated in Pakistan, and um that more of that version of things. And then I worked in the child welfare system, and then I would, get up on the stand in court and testify against people doing horrific things to children. And I've got that Aries energy very, very, very strong in me. And um and then and then over time, I left social work, and now I'm doing this, which is not, I'm not out there typically on the picket line or testifying in court, or what, all of those things. So I'm more in, maybe you could say, more in the Piscean energy, but I'm also doing the Aries thing because I'm leading. I mean, anyway, it's not black and white. Okay. But something that I really carry with me from my time, maybe more in the Aries moments, more than the active, overt way of helping, is also how key it is that even no matter what it is we're doing outwardly, that um when we are trying to help, we really, really, really can help the most if we are grounded and centered in our own nervous system. And, you know,
Absolutely.
yes, we've can come to that center point that you're talking about, and
Yes.
the Piscean totality of things and the peace is really hard. When I was a teenager, I got trained to be a paramedic, and I thought originally I was going to be a pediatrician, and so I interned in emergency rooms and did all those kinds of things too. Right? Again, this Aries, Aries, Aries energy that I came in
Yeah.
with, yeah. Um, and if you're working in an emergency room and if you're going around sort of flying off the handle in panic, you're not going to be able to help anybody, right? So,
Yeah.
right. So I'm
Exactly.
Right. So I'm thinking of that. And I'm also thinking, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just having a little flash leading on directly from what you just said. I thought, oh my God, maybe these are times when all of us can think of ourselves as in the emergency room.
Wow. 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 Right. Right. Right.
We're in
Exactly.
the emergency room
Hmm.
and what to do, how best to help,
Right.
and so forth.
Yeah. If we were in the emergency,
Obviously,
yeah.
because, all of us have both Pisces and
Yeah.
Aries in our horoscope,
Mhm.
whether or not we've got planets there.
Yes.
And so it might be interesting to just look on your horoscope and see where Pisces and Aries sit in your chart. In other words, which
Yes.
houses
Mhm.
they're in, because that's where all this action will be occurring. And it
Yes.
might well be that there is something very specific that comes to you or that you are called to,
Hmm.
you know?
And those energies.
And it might not be, because there are plenty of groups all over the place who are engaging in prayer that is focused around what's up now at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
Plenty of them. And so, who's to say, in a way, whether that's a Piscean way or an Aries way of meeting a situation? Because, hey, both are involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there are numerous groups that I know of who are working online or in other ways and just meeting for silent prayers or focusing around a particular image. And so, they're not focused around resisting or fighting anything that they see going on. It's more pitching the energy at the level of healing
Yeah.
and love without any kind of attempt or wish to, as it were, intervene or interfere or anything else. It's just nourishing this field of love.
Yes, exactly. And the one other thing I was just going to throw in is the key importance of that object relations part that you're talking about. So when I was in grad school to be a psychotherapist, I studied Melanie Klein a lot. So I'm very familiar.
Okay, so you know all about that.
I know a lot about that and attachment theory. It was the big thing that I studied. Yeah. So but yeah, I mean, we know, right? If we go around the world, go around our lives with a very out of whack attachment style, we're going to be spreading very difficult attachment issues. That's all we're going around spreading, strife and discord and I don't know, difficulty and drama and if our goal is really, really, really truly on a deep, deep inner level to be the change that we want, right? That classic phrase. I mean, it has to start. It has to start with our own inner object relations. It has to start with our own inner attachment healing. It's not trivial, just like you said, at all.
Absolutely. And as I would understand it anyway, it's not about considering the residue of these old ego patterns and so forth in the object relations. It's not that you have to think you have to get rid of that
Mm.
before your own field of relationship will be clearer. Because the moment you think in terms of getting rid of anything
Yes.
within the soul, you set up your own private little war.
Yes. Inside yourself. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which,
Mhm.
of course, given the opportunity, it will spread out to conflict outside you and so forth.
Yes.
And
And
we do easily lapse into, it's almost like scapegoating
yeah.
something within us and then
Yes.
working subtly, however noble we might feel ourselves to be,
Yes.
um, working to get rid of it.
Yes. Yes.
The
And that
alternative being the capacity to see it and bear with it, understand where it comes from, and it will transform by itself. This is the thing, we
oh,
don't have to mess with it.
yes, beautiful. And yes, and then there's, I won't go down this road, but there's the concept of the good enough mother, right? Like, so it's,
Yeah,
it's right in that
yeah,
whole.
in a way, that's the also a restoration of the horizontal axis,
Mhm.
because in all of our relationships, none of us can ever be perfect or
No,
get it right all the time,
exactly.
and we could say that it's along that horizontal line where the wisdom of that becomes grounded,
Yes.
where someone can be friends enough or
Yes.
loving enough,
Yes.
and that can still be held within the field of love in a
Yes.
very deep way.
Oh, that's a game changer. I feel it in myself even. And I
Mm.
would say that goes along with the North Node in Pisces with Neptune, et cetera, with this radical forgiving energy that's so alive right now too.
Mm.
Yes, but yeah, I think my ultimate takeaway from everything here is this image of it's I'm seeing it like almost even the dot of Aries, right? The spark of life that comes out of Pisces is held in what you're calling the lemniscate, this infinity symbol that's continuous, that's always moving,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
holding the spark of Aries. Like that's the image coming to me is that it's not that we're
yeah,
toward starting a whole new thing out of
yeah,
Aries, I mean out of Pisces. It's not that we're leaving Pisces, it's that we're into
absolutely.
all of it and
Yeah,
yeah, being held.
yeah, that's how I feel it anyway.
Yes. So as we have the new moon, the solar eclipse new moon in Aries, and in addition, when we're heading toward February 20th, 2026, we're going to have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 Aries, which is such a
Yes.
start energy.
Yeah,
That's the big takeaway for me, is that it's not that we're trying to leave behind something, and we're not trying to discard anything. We're trying to
exactly.
forgive, be held, remember that we are held, remember that we're in this the goal is maybe the to feel the good enoughness or something as
Oh, I like that.
mm,
Yeah, because
as
the whole notion of the signs of the zodiac, in a way, refers us to the eternal realms anyway. It's only if we think in terms of the sun traversing through each sign of the zodiac sequentially through the calendar year. So that's a timeline. But if we think about the zodiac as it were out of time,
yes,
then all those fields exist simultaneously.
yes, again the
So, in
circle.
that sense, we're not going anywhere.
No. We're right here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the circle and the dot again. Boop.
Yes, yes, yes,
Mhm.
that's so right.
Mm. It's so beautiful. Yeah, and again, I just feel it in my body, like our destination is actually here.
Mm.
And here we are.
And here we are.
Wow. Amazing. Wow. How healing to just even feel we have arrived. We are arrived.
Yes, yes.
Mm, wonderful. Any other last thing you want to say?
Um, Paraphrasing again, this is T.S. Eliot when he refers to um, the end being in the beginning or the beginning in the end. And he speaks about arriving back at the beginning to know the place for the first time.
Wow.
I hope I haven't messed that up too much, but you can easily find it. It's T.S. Eliot
Mm,
about arriving and going and leaving and arriving and that kind of thing. So
amazing.
here we are. We have arrived
Yeah.
somewhere in the great somewhere.
That's so good. Well, you know what? And I'll just throw in one last thing, which is this is fascinating. So Chris and I are actually holding a free event. The timing is fascinating to me on March 23rd.
Oh, perfect.
That wasn't planned on purpose, but as you're talking, I'm going, wow, wow, wow. Okay, and the topic that the well, the point of this free event, which everybody should join if you haven't yet, because you're all invited and it's free. Um, we're gonna be holding space to go back to the beginning of time, and actually go back to the before the beginning of time. To I'm gonna be channeling, and then anyway, we're gonna be holding this space for us all to go all the way back before the beginning, to the original breath of time, the original inception of existence, and the original inception of story, myth, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just thinking how perfect. That's the day Venus is conjunct the sun. It's like, huh.
Oh, that is perfect.
Oh
Mm.
my goodness. So, yes, wow. I feel Chris just sort of popping into the end of our conversation here going, yeah,
Yeah,
guys.
right.
Wow, wow, wow. Amazing, Melanie. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Martha, for another really enjoyable conversation.
Yes.
And thank you all for watching, viewing, participating out there.
Mhm. Yes, and today, please, I'm gonna, as with all of these daily videos, I'm gonna be putting a special sharing space for you to share your reflections, insights with us about this video today and anytime in the future, because again, these are all available indefinitely for free. So please share with us. Would love to hear anything alive for you. And yeah, and I'll put the link to Melanie's website. I'll put the link to all the Venus information. Plus, Melanie has, so many other things, and she's generously given us all a discount for your books, right? Yeah, so all those links are going to be here with the video, and Melanie is just such a gift. So, yay.
Thanks, Martha. You are too.
Aw,
Thank you.
thank you. See you all very soon.